Good morning, everybody. Thank you for coming. It's a beautiful day, a little chilly, so I'm going to keep this short. First, I'd like to thank the Veterans Committee for helping with this event. John Amato, Dr. Barrett, Shelley Evans, Dr. Fenton, Agnes Fulmer, Dr. Hart, Kaylee Horvat, Rich Crankota, Terry Mahoney, Gary Mason, Lucy Nesbitt, Sandy Porter, Dr. Rob, Dick Runnels, and Lon Wilson. Thank you for helping with this event. And I'd like to thank Vantage because without them we wouldn't be able to have this event. They've been very generous with their donations and time. They have a display set up inside. If you appreciate it, if you take a few minutes to look at what they have. And now from Vantage, Dean Warner, the Chief Operating Officer, would like to say a few words.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Good morning. I'd like to thank everyone for braving the cold this morning to make it out here. Welcome to today's ceremony. I'm honored to be speaking with you today on such an important occasion. We're here today to honor our service members and to remember the sacrifices that they have made and the courage that it takes to defend duty, honor, and country. We're here today to honor our heroes, to remember their achievements, their courage, and their dedication, and to say thank you for their sacrifices. Thinking of the heroes who joined us today, and those who are here only in spirit, a person can't help but feel awed by the enormity of what we encounter. We stand in the midst of patriots and the families and friends of those who have served. I'd like to ask any service members that are here this morning to just raise their hand if you would, please. Great. Thank you. Thank you. And thank you for answering the call to duty. You've made our armed forces one of the most respected armed forces in the world. I'd also like to thank any family members of service members. If you could just raise your hand as well, please. Great. Thank you. We know many of you have lived through difficult times and taken a heavy load to keep the home fires burning while our servicemen and women were away. Thank you again for what you've done. The service members we honor today have come from all walks of life, but they shared several fundamental qualities. They possess courage, pride, determination, selflessness, dedication to duty, and integrity. All the qualities needed to serve a cause larger than oneself. Many of them didn't ask to leave their homes, to risk their lives and well-being to keep us safe and secure. Many didn't even volunteer. They didn't go into harm's way because they loved fighting or risking their lives. They were called to be part of something bigger than themselves. They were ordinary people who responded in extraordinary ways in extreme times. They rose to the nation's call because they wanted to protect a nation which has given us so much. Since the first days at Lexington and Concord, where shots were fired and the Revolutionary War began, American men and women have been answering the call to serve the nation's call to duty. Millions of Americans have fought and died here and abroad to defend our freedoms and to protect our way of life. Today, our servicemen and women continue to make the ultimate sacrifices. Even as we lose troops, more Americans are willing to step forward to say, "I'm ready to serve." They follow in the footsteps of generations of fine Americans. We've awarded many medals to service members, added their names to monuments, and named buildings for them to honor their bravery, but nothing can replace the hole left behind by a fallen service member. And no number of medals and ribbons can comfort the ones left behind. Today, people throughout the country will gather to remember, to honor, and to pay gratitude and respect for those who have served our country. Our gathering is just one small spark in the flame of pride that burns across the nation today and every day. It's not a lot, but it's one small way we can honor those who made the ultimate sacrifices so that we can live in freedom. Your presence here today, and that of the people gathering all across America, is a tribute to those lost and injured and to their families. It's a way to say we remember and to honor all that have served. and those who have served on the land, sea, air, both here and abroad. Thank you for your service. Thank you for attending today, and God bless you and your family members. Thank you. I want to introduce Dr. Barrett. Do you believe you'd like to say a few words?
Not sure I'd like to, but good morning. I want to welcome you to this service this morning. And the remarks today are devoted to the idea that this year is the 100th anniversary of World War I. And there will be services and remembrances throughout the year, including things like the Stereopticon Museum that will have World War I displays on every Saturday morning. And various organizations will be having these events, and we hope that you'll be able to share in those. But remember that World War I began on April the 6th of 1917, after there was almost 3 years of warfare in World War I at that time. And we had at that time fewer than 300,000 people in our army. And those were times when, like at the Battle of Verdun, they had a million casualties over the period of time, and we go into the war with 300,000 people. And we didn't even start to draft people until almost 2 months after we had declared the war. And we came up with training people in France rather than here because we didn't have camps in which to do the training. And we transported more than 2 million men to Europe and completed their training in France before they entered the combat area in the front lines. And it really wasn't until the fall of 1917, about 1 year before November 11th of 1918, which was the Armistice Day and the end of World War II, that we really got people overseas and into the combat in the fall. And in that year time in combat, we lost over 100,000 killed in action. And we didn't have anybody. Our Navy took good care of the convoys along with other people, so we didn't lose any of the combat troops on the way over or on the way back as far as that was concerned. So we want to make recognition of this being the 100th anniversary and to encourage you to participate in any recognitions that will be done throughout the community in this year, 100 years after the AEF was in France. And we thank you for coming today to this group.
I was just going to introduce you, so we're all good.
Thank you, Dr. Barrett. Please bow with me in prayer. Eternal Father, strong to save, whose arm has bound the restless wave, who bade the mighty ocean deep its own appointed limits keep, O hear us when we cry to Thee for those in peril on the sea. Almighty God, You are our Creator, Redeemer, and Sustainer. Many years ago, You moved men and women to establish this great nation of ours. You stirred people to hope and to dream for a land of freedom and peace. Yet, as we know all too well, freedom isn't free, and peace is often quite elusive. Thus, You inspired many of our brightest and best to proudly stand and defend their country. You gave us brave and loyal men and women who have steadfastly served in their chosen branch of our military. We gather today to remember those people. Bless those who gave the ultimate sacrifice. May we never forget them, and may we be compelled to honor them from this time forth and forevermore. We pray that You continue to comfort and bless their families as well. May they sense Your peace, Your compassion, and Your nearness to help. Bless those who have previously served in the military. May their sacrifices be rewarded in every way. May they continually gain heavenly blessings from their unselfish love of country. Bless also, O Lord, those who currently serve. Provide them with Your protection, Your strength, and Your guidance. Abide also with their families, O God. Alleviate their anxiety and bring them peace. O Trinity of love and power, all travelers guard in danger's hour. From rock and tempest, fire and foe, protect them wheresoe'er they go. Thus evermore shall rise to thee glad praise from air and land and sea. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen.
And now VFW Post 2006 and Veterans Post 52 will present the colors.
Port arms. Half right, pace. Ready. Aim. Fire. Aim. Fire. Aim. Fire. Port arms. Half left, pace. Present arms.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rockets' red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through
Pontiac Lake Girl Scout Troop 36539 lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. You guys have to start.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, now we can all go inside. We'll have something to eat. We'll have the Quilts of Valor. If you're a veteran and want to have your picture taken, there's a card to fill out, and we'll do that in the other room. Thank you. We're going to begin with the Quilts of Valor. Colleen Munn is with that program, and she's going to present quilts to different veterans. So if we'd have your attention, please. Thank you.
I'll try it. Can you hear me yet? Okay. Well, good morning and happy Veterans Day to all you veterans. I would like to take a moment to say thank you to each one of you here today and for the freedoms we have. My name is Colleen Munn. I am with PA Stitchers of Valor, a local chapter of the National Quilts of Valor Foundation. Quilts of Valor was founded in 2003 by a grassroots quilter, Catherine Roberts. When her son was deployed to Iraq, she saw the quilts as a way of comfort and healing to veterans battling their demons of war. Our mission is to present Quilts of Valor to all veterans that have been touched by war. Since 2003, more than 170,000 quilts have been made and presented to veterans across the United States, Germany, Iraq, and Afghanistan. She states that a Quilt of Valor has the equivalent of a Purple Heart, only from a civilian. Today I have with me the PA Stitchers of Valor. If you ladies want to come out. PA Stitchers of Valor started in this area in March of 2017. We currently have over 60 members with 18 to 20 actively working on quilts on a monthly basis. After this weekend, we will have presented 48 quilts to a veteran in Crawford County with requests coming in daily. What does a Quilt of Valor mean? A Quilt of Valor is not a charity quilt or a blanket. It consists of 3 layers. The top of the quilt, with its many colors, shapes, and fabric, represents each one of us here today and all of us in the community. The batting, the filling of the quilt is the comfort or warmth of the quilt. It represents hope that this quilt will bring warmth, comfort, and peace and healing to the individual receiving it. You might want to turn kind of that way too. You can get in front of me, it's all right. The backing is the strength that supports the other layers. It represents the strength of the recipient, the support of family, friends, and community. Each stitch, which is hard to see on this little piece, but each stitch that holds the layers together represents the love, gratitude, and sometimes the tears of the makers. We have a monthly sew day, and on those days we share about our family, friends, and loved ones who are serving or who have served, and often there are tears as we sew. Ladies and gentlemen, it is our honor to award the following individuals with their Quilt of Valor on behalf of Quilt of Valor Foundation and PA Stitchers of Valor. This morning we hope to bring them honor and comfort, though we may never know the depth of their sacrifice to protect and defend the United States of America. As a gesture of our gratitude from a grateful nation, we ask each of you to please come forward as Commissioner Chief Master Retired John Amato calls your name to accept the Quilt of Valor. Please bring your spouse or a close family member if they are available with you to help with the presentation.
Can't do it without him anymore.
Yeah, I can't hear.
I know.
Good morning. Our first recipient is Army Sergeant Victor Mumford. Sergeant Mumford's a Korean War Army veteran. His dates of service are 1948 to 1951. He was with Company A and Charlie Battalion, 3rd Division. He served in Korea and Okinawa. His jobs were mechanic, and he was the motor pool sergeant. Sergeant Victor Mumford. Okay. Our next recipient is Private First Class Richard Clayton. Now, Richard Clayton's a personal friend of mine. Actually, he's more like an uncle, I think, than a personal friend. I've known him for a lot of years, so this is a great honor for me to do this for this guy. He's a Korean War Army veteran, served in the 5th Regimental Combat Team. He was one of the youngest guys in his company. I just know that because I've heard the story. His dates of service were 1950 to 1954. And again, he was in Korea, 50 to 51 as a rifleman, and he was a mortarman. After he left Korea, he went to Germany, and in Germany he drove trucks and through Europe and all of Germany. He worked in the hospital, Camp Pickett, Virginia, at the information desk at the tail end of his career. He was wounded in action in Korea and received the Purple Heart on March 17, 1951, and he also earned a Combat Infantry Badge. Private First Class Richard S. Clayton. Next individual is Lieutenant Colonel Robert Hudson, United States Air Force. Colonel Hudson served in the Iraq and Afghan theaters. I actually deployed with him to Kuwait, although I had a much plusher place to stay than he did. And then I was his chief in Baghdad, Iraq, and I was his operations sergeant at the airport in Kyrgyzstan. But his dates of service, he was the commander of the 910th Mission Support Group, 910th Airlift Wing, which is a C-130 Air Reserve unit. He coordinated support combat efforts for 6 different deployments for the wing. He's retired from the military service. He served in law enforcement and education, and he is one of our speakers later in the program. Lieutenant Colonel Robert Hudson. The next gentleman is Private First Class Paul Mushrush. Private First Class Mushrush is a World War II veteran of the United States Army, serving from May 1944 to 1946. He was with Company A, 711th Railway Operating Battalion. And again, Mr. Mushrush is one of our speakers today, so we'll hear from him as the program progresses. Thank you, Private First Class Paul Mushrush. Our next recipient is Dr. John Robb. He's a World War II Army veteran, and Dr. Robb was a POW in Germany in December 1944 to October 1945. He was captured in the Battle of the Bulge. He served from 1943 to 1946 in the infantry as a heavy mortar crew gunner. He was a recipient of the Bronze Star. Dr. John Robb. Next is Corporal Ronald Harrison of the United States Marine Corps. His dates of service are 1994 to 2004. He was a machine gunner in the infantry. Corporal Ronald Harrison. Our next recipient, Specialist James Meyer, served in Iraqi freedom in the United States Army. His dates of service were April 3rd, 2003 to April 3rd, 2006. He was stationed in Fort Hood, Texas. In 2004 to 2005, he was at Camp War Eagle in Sadr City, Iraq. His awards include Army Commendation Medal, Good Conduct Medal, National Defense Medal, Global War on Terrorism Service Medal, and Army Service Ribbon. He served as a Signal Support Specialist in the Combat Action Brigade, and he's also earned the Iraq Campaign Medal. Specialist James Meyer. Next is Samuel Eugene Amarine, Sr., a Korean and Vietnam Air Force veteran, retired from the military after 21 years of service. Did 2 tours in Korea, 1956 to 1963. He did 2 tours in Vietnam. Later, he was stationed in England and Okinawa. He was an airport manager for the Air Force from 1992 to 1999. He did 1 tour in Bosnia in 2004 as a civilian. Samuel Eugene Amarine. You're in.
For those of us who have never served or seen combat or been in a war zone, such experiences are beyond our capacity to comprehend. But we believe that the quilt that is awarded to you today has the ability to offer comfort, healing, and warmth. We hope that when you experience dark times or need the warmth of a grateful hug, you will wrap your quilt around you so that it will provide you the comfort which has been sewn into each inch and feels the expression of gratitude from those of us who work to create this for you. Each quilt of ours is presented with a hug, not given like a book or a magazine. On one side of the quilt is the quilter, representing all quilters across America. It also represents the community. On the other side is a family member or a friend, so that you will never forget that you have the support of family, friends, and community. Ladies, would you please come in, present your quilts?
I think we should give all the ladies that have out these blankets.
With each quilt comes a certificate which states, "The Quilts of Valor Foundation wishes to recognize you for your service to our nation. We consider it a privilege to honor you. Though we may never know the extent of your sacrifice and service to protect and defend the United States of America, as an expression of our gratitude, we award you this Quilt of Valor." It also comes with a presentation case, which the girls will give to you. As of today, the story of this quilt becomes your story. We hope you will keep this quilt with you as a tangible reminder that there are thousands of men and women across the country who are forever in your debt. Again, it has been an honor for all of us to be here today to present these Quilts of Valor to you. Thank you for having us.
They're nominated and we get them until we get to the award ceremony and see their name on it. Thank you very much. So it's
At this time, I'd like everybody to remain seated so that we can have the solemn missing man ceremony presented by Vietnam Veterans Post 52. Thank you.
Good morning. First of all, on behalf of Commander Preston and President Phil Davis, Dell is commander of Post 52 and Phil Davis is president of our Veterans Welcome Home Association. So with that, we're going to begin a presentation that talks about not us, but those of us who did not and have not made it home yet. They are our brothers and sisters who are missing in action. Please direct your attention to the table placed to my left. It's a physical symbol of the thousands of American POWs and MIAs still unaccounted for from all foreign conflicts. We would ask that you remain quiet, reflecting in your own silent prayer for those warriors who have yet to find their way home. And thank you. Now we would like to explain the symbolism of this ceremony as veterans of the Vietnam War Post 52 Honor Guard places items upon the table. Those who have served and those who are currently serving in the uniformed services of the United States of America are ever mindful that the sweetness of enduring peace has always been tainted by the bitterness of personal sacrifice. We're compelled to never forget that while we enjoy our daily pleasures, there are others who have endured and may still be enduring the agonies of pain, deprivation, and imprisonment. A reminder for us all to spare no effort to secure the release of any American prisoners from captivity, the repatriation of the remains of those who died bravely in defense of liberty, and demand a full accounting of those missing in action. We call them comrades. They are unable to be with their loved ones and their families. So we join together to pay humble tribute to them and to bear witness to their continued absence. The table is small, symbolizing the helplessness of one prisoner alone against his or her oppressors. The tablecloth is white, symbolic of the purity of their intentions to respond to their country's call to arms. Our comrades are missing from the United States Army. Our comrades are missing from the United States Navy. Our comrades are missing from the United States Air Force. Our comrades are missing from the United States Marine Corps. Our comrades are missing from the United States Coast Guard. The single rose in a vase signifies the blood they may have shed in sacrifice to ensure the freedom of our beloved United States of America. This rose also reminds us of the families and friends of our missing comrades who keep faith while awaiting their return. The red ribbon on the base represents the red ribbons worn on the lapels of thousands who demand with unyielding determination a proper accounting of our comrades who are not among us. A slice of lemon on the plate reminds us of their bitter fate. The salt sprinkled on the plate reminds us of the countless fallen tears of families as they wait. The glass is inverted. They cannot toast with us at this time. The Bible is placed prominently on the table. The Bible represents the strength gained through faith to sustain those lost from our country. The United States of America was founded as one nation under God. The chair is empty. They are not here. The candle is reminiscent of the light of hope that lives in our hearts to illuminate their way home, away from their captors, to the open arms of a grateful nation. The American flag reminds us that many of them may never return and have paid the supreme sacrifice to ensure our freedom. Let us pray to the Supreme Commander that all of our comrades will soon be back within our ranks. Let us remember and never forget their sacrifices. May God watch over them and protect them and their families, and may each of us live worthy of their sacrifices in the way that we love and serve this great nation. Thank you.
Mark on march. Detail, halt. Right face. Present arms. Ready, two. Right face. Forward march. Halt, halt, march.
Our first speaker today is Lieutenant Colonel Robert Hudson, and I said during the quilt ceremony, I had the honor to serve with him at in the 76 Airport Squadron. When I came in, he was a captain, I was a staff sergeant, and he was the commander eventually, and I became his chief. We also had the opportunity to serve in Kuwait, Iraq, and Kyrgyzstan together. And it's an honor to have him here today. When they were looking for speakers, much to his chagrin, I'm sure, I volunteered him for this. And it was a great honor again to present Lieutenant Colonel Hudson.
Well, the chief told me I have to keep it down to an hour and a half, so I'm gonna try to do that. So, chief knows I've never been for loss of words. I've always had the gift of gab. The first thing I want to say is greetings, good morning to all, especially all the veterans that are in here, the ones that paved the way long before myself and Chief and Major Golenberg even went into the military. You know, they've got the Korean War veterans, the Vietnam War veterans, especially the ones from the Air Force. You know, that's the service we went into. You guys paved the way. You made the service what it was by the time we got there. And we do appreciate it, and we just hope that we did justice as we tried to keep the traditions and the excellence moving on. I want to thank you for allowing me to speak at this year's Veterans Day event with you guys. And I would like to say a special welcome, thank you to two special people, and that's Chief Amato, who most of you, everybody probably knows. I don't think there's anybody in Meadville who doesn't know him. Major Golenberg, who also served with us and was a special mentor to me and gave me guidance on our different tours that we did together. The chief is right that when he asked me to do this, well, I can say he didn't ask. You know, I've done numerous invitations to speak. I'm speaking at Memorial Day services. I've presided over retirements since I retired. I've gone over to Youngstown and presided over retirements. Went to Chicago and did a retirement for a recruiter that I had worked hand in hand with, and presided over that. Every case, they always sent me a nice request, a phone call or a message. Sir, we'd like to have you come do this ceremony for us. Would you like to do that? Of course, I would never turn them down. And the same with Chief. If he made a request, I wouldn't have turned him down. But everybody that's in the military knows that you don't turn a chief down. So it doesn't really matter whether he asked or if he told. I would still been here. All the other ones were requests, but I got a message from the chief. Hey, Colonel, I volunteered you for the speaking engagement. This is the time to be here. So it wasn't so much a request. So, you know, a full-bird colonel's not really going to tell a chief no, so definitely a lieutenant colonel wasn't going to tell him no. I do consider it an honor to be here, you know, with him and with everybody that's here. I was a logistics squadron commander in Kyrgyzstan and in Baghdad, and Chief Amato and Major Golenberg both, you know, were key people of my staff. They kept me out of trouble. Sometimes things would come up, and a lot of things were fast-paced and trying to get things done. And sometimes I would talk before I would think, and they'd pull me aside, and they kept me out of trouble. Chief Amato was talking about a little bit when we were both in Kuwait. We were doing a year activation, and we had gone to Dover Air Force Base. He was part of my 25-member team. They got sent out about 3 or 4 weeks before I did. And they went to Kuwait, but they went to the 5-star hotel. And I got sent to Camp Armstrong, and I was in a tent. They would always come to visit me and say, "Hey, sir, can we go look at your tent? We're jealous." So they were very jealous of my tent, my little cubicle that I had that I was able to divide it by hanging shower curtains so I could have a little bit of privacy. And then I did have a chance before I left, because I was leaving about the same time they were, because they extended a little bit. I went and saw their five-star hotel with a beach and the buffets that they have, and I don't think they were really jealous of my tent. So these guys, I can't thank them enough. If you get a chance, they did a lot of important work. They did a lot of behind the scenes. They're very similar to another major that served with us. All three of those guys, a commander couldn't have asked to have three better people serving with them. They were not about themselves. They were about the people, taking care of the people. There was no accolades that they were seeking. Everything they did was trying to promote the airmen and the enlisted airmen that were below them, that worked for them. They always trying to put them out front so they got the credit and the accolades. They never sought that ever. Today I was asked to speak today about logistics. And logistics is a vital part of the fighting a war. Logistics involves the acquisition of as well as movement of supplies, equipment, and manpower. In the war theater, it's timely acquisition and movement. It has to be done precisely and exactly so that you're getting what you need to the warfighter, because that's who you're supporting, the warfighter. In your logistics, you want to get the person who's out front, the people who are in Sadr City, the people that were out in the FOBs in Afghanistan, that were on the outlying, that they couldn't maintain months of supplies there. So you needed to get the equipment there, you needed to get supplies there, the food, the water. You also needed to get manpower when it was time to switch out. So logistics is important when it comes to the war fight, but it's not about the people doing it, it's about the people you're supporting and what you've got to get done. So it's getting the critical supplies there. So it really means getting the right items, the right personnel, and the right equipment at the right time. Doesn't do any good to send a whole lot of people somewhere and you've got nothing for them to use or do. So you've got to get everything in a timely manner. I'm going to speak a little bit from my experiences that and how it related to the logistics movements. My first deployment was back in 2002. I was assigned to work for NATO headquarters in Skopje, Macedonia, and there we were supporting the transition of Macedonia as it separated from the old Yugoslav conglomerate of countries. And we were also there to support all the activities and actions that were going on in Kosovo at the time. Kosovo was still pretty volatile. They loved Americans, but there was still a lot of fighting between the different factions. So it was trying to restore peace and tranquility in a place where tensions had been pretty bad for 3, 4, 5 years. There I was assigned as the air cell coordinator, and I was responsible for the movement of passengers and cargo in and out of Macedonia, and most of them were supporting the operations in Kosovo and Pristina. Here, it was vital to have good communications, because we were working with many different countries. At the Skopje itself, there were 14 different countries that were working at the headquarters. So you had to have some good communications. The two languages that were spoken for NATO at the time were French and English. But you had Greeks, you had Italians, and I worked for an Italian boss, where many of them didn't have they had the English skills, but you had to really work through them because they didn't understand the nuances of the English language that we have here. So you had to have good communication skills. Working directly on me was a 32-member French team that did the cargo, and a 25-member German team that did all the passenger movements. So a lot of coordinations and things that had to go on to get things moving throughout. One of the big things that we did while we were there is we had a big deployment movement of the 24th Marine Expeditionary Unit. That was over 1,800 personnel, and they had to come up through Greece, Thessaloniki, Greece, come up into Macedonia, and we had to get them into Kosovo. And along with it came their equipment. We moved most of them on trains, but we had to load a lot of the equipment on trains to get them into Kosovo. There's 1,800 personnel, 208 military vehicles, 55 civilian buses and trucks. along with a lot of their food and water supplies that they were going to have as they were moving, because they weren't staying in nice little hotels. Some of them, they were having to set up their own tents, even though they were only going to stay there for 2 or 3 days as they moved out to different parts of the country. It was used to show of force and let them know that the United States was there to do business along with NATO. But you had to efficiently move it. It just, a lot of coordination with the Macedonian government, because you're using their trains, and going into FIREM, because there the UN was, FIREM was a former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia. So I should clarify that. But with the FIREM border crossing, well, as soon as you crossed over that, you switched into control under, at that time, the United Nations. And so a lot of coordination going through there. So we had to provide movement, we had to provide bed down, and food as well. So a lot of people, when they look at this, something like that, and they go, well, you're just moving a bunch of people, it's not a big deal. But if we didn't get the food, we didn't get the trucks and equipment along to show up at the same time that you got that the men that were going to be movement, they would be sitting around waiting on it. So once again, it's timely movement. My second tour was a year-long activation. That's what I did with the chief, with 24 members from the airport at Youngstown, and we were assigned to Dover Air Force Base. And that may sound like not too bad, Dover. Ran a lot. The guys ran a lot of 12-hour shifts, 5 days a week, 6 days a week. It was at that time a lot of the equipment that was going to support Southeast Asia was run through the Dover Airport. At that time, it was the busiest airport in the continental United States that was moving equipment in and out. So these guys were very busy. They probably were glad to see that they got orders to go to Kuwait, because they thought maybe they were going to slow down a little bit once they got there. But and there, like I said, we were instrumental in moving cargo through there, and we had a lot of C-5s, the C-130s, C-17s coming in and out. And sometimes as one was taking off, another one was landing. And these guys had to have the coordination of getting that cargo, and the passengers that were moving through had to get them, loaded on. You didn't want to get a plane off late. If you got a plane off late, wasn't good, was it, Chief? No. If you got a plane off late, you usually stand there in front of the wing commander trying to explain, what happened, that it got off late. Eventually, the main group, they went to Kuwait International, as I told you earlier, and then I went to the fabulous Camp Arif John, the land of tents. And I was working for the CENTCOM Deployment Distribution Operations Center, where I was acting as a air requirements shift chief. And there, what we did is we had to oversee the prioritization, the validation, and the tracking over 2,600 air movements within a 6-month period. And when I say you had to prioritize, you had people calling and doing requests all the time that they needed water here, they needed food supplies here, they needed fire trucks here, and so we had to prioritize it. And it became pretty routine until they had an operation called Phantom Fury, and that's when the Marines were really taking the biggest hit when they had to take Baghdad. And that Phantom Fury went on for, it probably seemed like months for the people that were fighting it. But it went on for about 3 weeks that they were just fighting left and right, trying to clear them out. And we had to prioritize what they needed. And they needed ammo, and they were getting 8 to 9 airplanes a day of ammo getting in and out. So, which we were able to do, but you had to prioritize. And so then we had people calling, and we were in Kuwait, but we had people calling from Afghanistan and other FOBs that were forward operating bases that were in Iraq. And they're getting mad at you because they're not getting what they needed. But we had to look at it. Well, they got 3 days of water supply. Well, logistically, they can last a lot longer. The troops that were fighting, the men that were fighting in Baghdad at that time, needed ammo a lot more than they needed water. couldn't explain that to them, and I can't tell you how many people said they were going to come up to Kuwait and speak to me personally about it. And I invited them, told them where I was, but nobody ever showed up, fortunately. But those are the hard decisions that you have to make logistically, because once again, it's getting the right stuff to the right place at the right time. And at that time, getting ammo, even those plane loads of it, into Baghdad to get dispersed for the people that are fighting it was the most important. My next two deployments, which included the two gentlemen here, and once again, I said they were vital into making a very successful deployments, were to Manas Air Base in Kyrgyzstan. That was May 2007, and then Saith Air Base in Baghdad, Iraq, and that was in September 2008. Just a little side story to that. When we got done with our deployment in Kyrgyzstan, I think all three of us told our wives, hey, we're not going to be doing this for a while, because we just did a deployment, so we're good. And almost a year to the date that we left Kyrgyzstan, we were landing in at Saith Air Base. So a lot of us had a lot of making up to do when we got home. Mine cost me a Hawaii vacation. I don't know what it cost the chief and the major, but as I was walking out the door with my bags packed, my wife looked at me and said, you owe me a Hawaii vacation for this one. I said, yes, ma'am. So I got that thing booked real quick. Both locations, we were called an Expeditionary Logistics Readiness Squadron. And we had a lot of responsibilities. In both locations, we did the exact same things. We were responsible for the POL, which is Petroleum, Oil, and Lubricants section, but we provided all the fuel for the vehicles that were used on the base, the airplanes that came in, and then Baghdad included helicopters that were flying all night in and out, but we had to make sure we had enough fuel for them. We also did all the supplies responsible for supplies that were required by the different units, and with security forces there, with civil engineering there, and our own supply people, our own PO people. There were a lot of supplies that had to come in and out. We were also responsible for supplies that had to go downrange, further on. So we had to do a lot of coordination with it. These guys were the ones that did all that for me. The Kyrgyzstan, we had 187 personnel, and we were supporting the Afghanistan operations. And some of the things that we did, just in the months that we were there, we did over 45 million pounds of fuel for the war fighters. We did supported over 1,200 combined strikes on the enemy in Afghanistan. Enemy troops in contact. The airport itself moved over 10,500 short tons of cargo and 31,000 packs. And packs is a short name for passengers. So if you hear me say that again, that's what it means. Saith Air Base, which at that time, while we were there, was the busiest airfield in the Iraq theater. There they supported over 6,034 missions. They moved over 192,000 passengers and over 21,679 short tons of cargo. The POL that we were responsible for fueled over 3,408 aircraft, and they were well over 300 million gallons of fuel that was dispersed. So I couldn't do that alone as a commander. These guys, in coordination with me and working with all the different sections, they made it happen. 2012, I got brave again and asked my wife, said, hey, they got a deployment coming up. You care if I go? I got the mean look, and then she looked for a little while, and she goes, well, you're going to do it anyway, so go ahead. And little did she know, if she had said no, I probably would have said, okay, this one I better give her. But since I got her blessing, I went. And there I served at that time was the only full-run airport squadron that was in the theater. The other places, the airport came under Logistics Readiness Squadron. So I served as the ops officer of 161 personnel. This was at that time, it was the busiest, not busiest military airport. It was the busiest airport that DOD operated in the world at that time. including continental U.S., Hawaii, Alaska, in Germany, where we have a large operation in Ramstein. This one was the busiest airport run by DoD at the time. What it had done is that it replaced Manaus Air Base, where we used to be, where they used to split it all. Well, Bagram had taken on the whole support for the Afghan operations at that time. So, and there we moved 102,000 tons of cargo, 227,000 packs, and 16,000 airlift missions, supporting 100,000 warfighters. Now, in all these deployments, they were about about 5, 6, 7 months long, depending on when you got there. So these numbers I'm giving you, if you started multiplying them by 2, that would give you some of the yearly operations and movements that the military had to do. So it took a lot of coordination between the host units, which was us, the FOBs that we had to get it out to, and the Air Mobility Division that was running the aircraft support throughout the whole theater, in conjunction with, back in the United States out of Scott Air Force Base. The movements in Afghanistan supported 14 FOBs at that time, which was, some of them were varied. The only place you could get into was either helicopter or a C-130 landing on a dirt strip. There were quite a few of them that we had to drop. We had to drop water supplies and food supplies just because the dangerousness. Even though the 130s could land on there and could get off real quick, sometimes it was safer to drop them. And while I was there, we had no drops missed. Every drop went where it was supposed to be, and there were probably well over 1,000 drops while I was there. And once again, that's another way of trying to get the right things, the right equipment, the right supplies to the right people. There were water supplies that were dropped, the ammo supplies were dropped, and you definitely didn't want the ammo supplies getting into the hands of the enemy. So these guys, these pilots that were coming down on the 130 to drop this stuff, they had to get pretty low, so it's pretty dangerous. So logistics isn't necessarily, it's not a safe haven. Career that you really want to go into as a C-130 pilot. In all these 3 war locations that I was part of, there were a lot of vital movements, including large units deploying and redeploying, including their equipment. This, once again, required efficient and timely scheduling of processing times, and show times, and load times. You had to make sure you got the maximum and efficient use of all available aircraft. You did not want an aircraft going out that had even 1 or 2 empty spaces on them. You needed to make sure that your people that worked for you were going through their cargo yards, and making sure that the equipment was getting on there. Operate an aircraft that runs going from one location to another location, even though it doesn't seem very far, it would cost thousands of dollars just to move it. So you want to make efficient use of it. My very last deployment that I did was in 2015, and there I served as a director of staff for an air base in Kuwait that had been closed a long time. So we restood it up, and then we turned it into the 332nd Airlift Wing. It was airlift. They had airlift, and they also had fighters, and they had some other planes that I really can't tell you who they were, but the main fight at that time was against ISIS, or as we call them, ISIL at the time. And as here I finally was involved at the staff level in evaluating supply requirements and manpower requirements. From there, we were supporting all the new locations that had opened up in Iraq again. Some of them ones that we had been there before and had to reopen, and some were new places. But we had to make sure we got the right manpower and equipment to these new places because there wasn't things already in place. So you're basically, even though the places that we had before, you were reopening a whole new thing. So you had to get supplies and equipment there real quick. There were at least 5 other locations that we were supporting at that time, including Jordan. We had an air base in Jordan that we were also supporting. It came under us, and we had to make sure they got supplies and equipment. So when you talk about logistics in a war theater, you're talking about many moving parts that you're trying to get things to. I'd like to say the officers did a great job, but it wasn't the officers that did it. It was the enlisted troops that made it work. You know, we'd sometimes get together and we come up with great ideas, then we go see the chiefs and say, hey, what do you think about this? And they go, no, we got this. We got it handled. Your chiefs, your section chiefs, your enlisted people were the ones who made it work. And I can't really emphasize that enough, that all the officers, all the staff, all the brain power, you may come up with what you need, what you're going to need, and where it's needed, but the people that worked for me, they got it done. They made it sure it got there. So one thing I just want to look back and is, and I think about my dad when I think about veterans. My father was an Air Force veteran. He served got out right after the end of the Vietnam War. The official end in '74. The one thing I do remember, and to this day, I'll always thank a Vietnam veteran. You know, as ourselves as veterans coming back from the different deployments that we did, we flew into Baltimore Airport, and you had people lined up thanking you for what you did. And Chief, Major, meant a lot, didn't it? When you saw these people, the USO people, lined up thanking you, giving you little goodie bags and stuff, because they know you were just coming back from, anywhere from 6 to 9 months to a year. And it was Air Force, Army, Navy, Coast Guard coming back through there. They didn't care. But I just remember while my dad was in, the Vietnam veterans were not treated the way veterans should be. And I know he was a little bit bitter at the end, but he still loved the Air Force. He still loved the people that were in it. He was a little bit bitter about the way people got treated. And even the Air Force itself, I can't speak for the other services, they got a mandate that they had to downsize. Well, their idea to downsize, well, let's not treat people the way they should be, and maybe they'll just get out, and they didn't want to make the hard decisions themselves. And the only thing he asked me when I went into the Air Force in 1975, he goes, I don't know if you're going to stay 4 years, I don't know if you'll stay 6, I don't know if you'll make a career. He goes, but no matter what you do, when you see a vet, you make sure you thank him. He said, when you're working with your people, he goes, if you got somebody working for you, you treat them like they're your brother, your sister. And I think I tried to do that. I did happen to get 2 very good chiefs that worked for me, and one of them preached Band of Brothers. Chief Amato, he preached Band of Brothers. You taught everybody like they were your brother. You treated them the way you would have wanted your father to be treated when they come home, the way you wanted your brother or sister when they come home to be treated, and the way your own kids when they come through. He set a standard at Youngstown for the airport. Major Golenberg set a standard. And we'll always take care of vets and always think of that. And I'm thanking you guys now because you guys led the way and made our military what it is. So thank you very much.
Okay, our next speaker is Paul Mushrush, and Paul has a story to tell you that you haven't heard. It involves a part of World War II, which most people aren't familiar with. Paul was involved in what was known as the Lend-Lease program during the Second World War. Now, it was a program that provided the Soviet Union with resources when their country was in dire straits. You remember Germany invaded Russia. At one point early on, Russia was in dire straits and needed help. We supplied that. They established what was known as the Persian Corridor, and it was a supply route through Iran into the Soviet Union, and Lend-Lease supplies were transferred through that. And the delivery of these war materials was very critical to the Soviet Union and their survival. And when they set up the route through Iran, they established the railroad. The Army established the railroad. They sent personnel over there, military force technical teams, to run the supply route, and they actually sent 5 million tons of munition and other war supplies to the Soviet Union. And Paul was part of this program. As I say, it's something that a lot of people aren't familiar with. So Paul's going to relate to you his experiences, and it's my honor and privilege to present Paul Mushrush. He's 94 years young, still golfing and still boating. So, Paul.
Good morning, everybody. Good morning. Can you all hear me? Yes. Okay, I was drafted. I worked on the railroad in Meadville, on the Erie Railroad, as a fireman on steam engines. And they drafted me and sent me to Iran to run work trains on that railroad and maintain it so they could run these supplies to Russia. That was my job. And we went over there in a Liberty ship, little bit of a Liberty ship, and we was in an 18-ship convoy going across the Atlantic. And when we got to the Mediterranean Sea, the convoy went north to Normandy in England, and we went by ourselves into the Mediterranean Sea. And we couldn't use the Mediterranean Sea for regular transportation because it was full of German submarines. And it was very dangerous to get through that there, but they needed us so bad in Iran that they thought that would better take the shortest route. Well, that shortest route turned into 32 days on that ship. It was terrible. We could only travel during the daylight time, and we had airplanes circling overhead watching for subs. At night, everything was shut down. We sat still all night. No motors, no noises, no lights, no nothing. Every night. Well, this one night, there was a German sub in the area, and he torpedoed us, and it missed us. It went by us. They see it going by. They see the wake of this torpedo going by. And they must not have had any more because we waited all night for the second one and it never happened. Oh, well, anyway, we finally made it through the Mediterranean, down through the Suez Canal and the Red Seas, into the Indian Ocean and up into the Persian Gulf with our little ship. They had to use little ships because the Persian Gulf and these here ports there and ports at the deep where we had to disembark was shallow, and they couldn't go in there with big ships. And it's the same way sending the supplies over there in these same ships, Liberty ships, had to be small to get into the ports. So the Liberty ships, it was made by made in California by Kaiser Fraser made them. And they made 2,700 of them. They mass-produced them. And they needed them because that's what they used mainly to supply Russia with what they needed to fight with. And we, in the United States, made supplies for these here, for the Russians, the same as they made the supplies for the Americans in Europe. The same tanks and the same ammunition, the same big guns and everything. Everything they got in Europe, we sent to Russia, the same things. And airplanes, we even sent airplanes over there, and we had a battalion of Air Force men down at the Abadan, at one of the ports in Iran. We had a whole battalion of Air Force men down there to assemble the planes, come off these little ships, all in crates. They had to put them together down there and test fly them. And then they had to teach the Russian pilots how to fly our airplanes. Then they flew them to Tehran, and from there on to the Caspian Sea and on to the war. And with all the ammunitions, and and all the bombs and all the food and everything that they needed to fight with. It was a really monumental thing to see that railroad. And the railroad, but that railroad was nothing but more than a tuna rail trolley when we got over there. It was a wreck. 15-mile-an-hour speed. It was terrible. So our men completely rebuilt that railroad from one end to the other. And it was over 900 miles from the Persian Gulf to Tehran. And they wasn't straight, easy miles because it went from below sea level at the Persian Gulf to over 9,000 feet going through Iran to get to Tehran. It was really a tough railroad. And on top of all that, we had 135 tunnels in that railroad through the mountains. And everything had to be small enough to get through these tunnels. Nothing was easy. So that's why the airplanes had to be all taken off and fly and put the wings on one thing another at the port of entry and then flew up to Tehran. We sent bombers and fighter planes and all the equipment to go with them. Army tanks, big guns, everything. And it was my job to try to keep that railroad together and repaired. A small part of my railroad was between 200 to 300 miles down out of the desert into the mountains. Okay, we was running so many trains up into Russia after that railroad got so we could use it. Before we got it, the railroad so we could use it, the British wanted to maintain the railroad. The British wanted to, the Americans wanted to, Indians from India, they wanted to, and the Iranians wanted to run it, and everybody was trying to put it together so we could use it, and it was just mass confusion. Nothing was getting done. Everybody had different ideas. So the United States told them, we'll run the railroad and everybody else get out. So then it started working, and it worked good. We run trains like bananas up there after we got things going. The United States sent 125 brand new diesel electric engines over there, 125 of them, to handle all this here heavy freight. And the engines had to be small enough to get through these tunnels. So it had limits to how big they could be. But anyway, eventually it worked. And the Russians got what they needed. Also, we sent them tank car after tank car of fuel oil, high-test gasoline for the airplanes, and to run all the machinery that they had up there in Russia. We also sent them tank cars after tank cars of diesel fuel. Everything they needed, and Iran had lots of them. They had a good supply from the Iranian oil fields. So that part was all right. But I was stationed at Alwas, and they built a huge shops there in Alwas to build railroad cars for the railroad, because the cars that they had most of them didn't have any air brakes on them or anything. They were just tuna rail trolley, like I said. So they had this huge shop at Alwas to build new cars and to maintain all the rolling stock on the railroad, and that was quite a undertaking. So when I wasn't working on the work trains to maintain the railroad to whatever they needed, that shop used acetylene welding on building all these cars and everything. A lot of welding, but they didn't have no way of getting their oxygen for the oxygen. They could get the acetylene, but no oxygen. But the British had an oxygen plant in Iraq, in Basra. So about once a month, that was another one of my jobs, is to go to Basra with a big truckload of empty oxygen tanks and go across the Tigris and Euphrates rivers and over into Basra to the oxygen plant. And they filled them tanks one at a time. It took all day for them to fill a truckload of oxygen. But that was all right, because when you crossed the Tigris and Euphrates River, that was a big, long bridge. In the middle of that bridge, 8 o'clock every morning, dropped to the bottom of the rivers. So the ships could go up and down the Tigris and Euphrates rivers to Baghdad. And just before dark at night, they'd raise that bridge back up. It was all on big cables, and they'd raise it back up there so the road traffic could go. So that was all right if it took all day to fill the oxygen tanks, because I couldn't go back anyway. But anyway, it all worked out. And one time I went over there, and it was in the monsoon season. Everything was so hot and so wet, it was just dripping. The weather was terrible. Well, that's the season that the dates ripen over there. And everybody had dates for sale, all these Iraqi people. So I bought about 3 pounds of them. They was wrapped in cellophane, about the size of a pound of butter. And I had a man ride with me because we had to go through Arab country. And I had a man ride through with me. It was my shotgun man, for protection. I had my rifle, and he had a shotgun. And we was on our way home, and of course it was dark then. And my shotgun man says to me, he says, "You know, Paul," he says, "I'm getting hungry. Why don't we try a few of them dates?" I said, "Well, that's a good idea." And I gave him my knife. I said, "Just slice off a couple slices of them." So he did, and he said, "Well, those are good. We eat probably half a pound of them." Well, anyway, when we got back to camp, I went back to Awas with the oxygen. We took them to the shops where they was waiting on them, and then went back to the barracks. And the next morning, we had mud brick barracks we lived in. And anyway, I got up the next morning. The rest of the guys in the barracks says, "Well, how'd the trip go to Basra?" I says, "Oh, same as ever." But I said, we got some dates. Oh boy, they all wanted to try them. So we got the dates out and cut them off, some pieces, full of maggots. Full of maggots, white maggots. We eat a whole mess of them. That awful. Funny things like that happen. So I made up my mind right there, and never buy any imported dates. Boy, what a world. Well, anyway, as the war was raging in Europe, you all know about the European War and the Battle of the Bulge and all that stuff. While that was going hot licks, the Germans took whatever countries they wanted to with very little resistance. None of those other countries was prepared to fight the German army. And the German armies was something else. They was wonderful armies. And they had everything they needed to fight with. And they knew how to use them. So there's nothing that Europe could do when Germany come through there, but they just give up. The Germans just took everything they wanted. Okay, while the battles were raging in Europe, it was still, the Germans decided to move into Russia. So they did, and they got to Leningrad, and they leveled the city. They bombed it and leveled the city and killed them Russians by the thousands. And they was on their way to Moscow. They was going to take the whole country. And we got that supply route going up through Iran and supplied the Russians with everything that they needed to fight with. And and I mean everything: food, clothing, ammunition, guns, trucks by the thousands we sent up there, because our armies are no good unless they can be moved. Yeah, they got to be able to move and go where they need to, and they got to have these trucks to move their equipment and their war equipment. And so we sent them trucks by the thousands. I couldn't believe it. Anyway, that turned the tide of the war in Russia. They turned the Germans around, and the same time we was having the big Battle of the Bulge in Europe, we drove the Germans back into Berlin. The Russians drove them on their side, out of Russia, clear across Europe and back into Berlin. And that was the end of the war. And I don't suppose any of you ever heard about that story. But what would have happened in World War II if we hadn't supplied the Russians with what they needed and run that supply route through Russia or through Iran? That was an awful tough situation we had there. And not only that, that railroad had no communications. And you can't run trains in both directions on a single track without communications. No, especially through them mountains. And it's terrible terrain we had to run through. So we had to wire that entire railroad, over 900 miles of copper wire, to communicate before we could start running the trains. It was terrible. We run by train orders until we got the wires up. But the natives over there, Iranians, it wasn't over very many days, and they was stealing the wire. They'd cut down a couple miles of wire and melt it over. At night they'd do this. So another part of my job is replacing all these wires on that work train. So I was pretty busy all the time doing something like that. They used me wherever they needed me. They even had me as a station master at the depot at Awas, because that was the British's job, but half the time the British wouldn't show up. Yeah, and so that was my job, was a station master. And I had to take care of all the freight that come in and out of that there station there for the whole day. And we had a passenger train. One of them would go north one day and come south the next day. And all that there freight, it was personal freight and whatever they needed to ship by passenger train. It was my job to keep account of all that stuff and get it loaded and unloaded. And I had 3 natives that worked for me over there, and it was wonderful. And we got the job done. Then the next day I'd be back on the work train. And then once a month I took a break and went to Basra. So I was going all the time. That was Sunday when I used to go to Basra. I broke down one time with a truck, gas line broke on it, going across the desert, going to Basra. I was going as fast as I could go because I had to get there before they dropped that bridge down the bottom of the river. So I had to get over there before they done that. So I was going fast as I could across the desert, and a gas line broke. I didn't know what happened, but I was driving in an open cab truck, and I smelled gasoline. I looked down the floor, it was all wet with gas. So I stopped as quick as I could, and my shotgun man, he went one way and I went the other. And we waited till the fumes stopped, and I was waiting for a big explosion, but it didn't happen. So I come back and I found the gas line was broke where it went right into the carburetor, broke clear off. So I'm standing there looking at it there, wondering what I'm going to do with it. No tools, no nothing. I had a jack for changing tires, that's all. And I'm looking at it, wondering what I'm going to do, clear out in the middle of the desert. And I heard some shuffling around behind me, and I turned around and looked, and there were 3 or 4 camels with Arabs on them, with rifles, coming in behind me. And boy, if I'd been by myself, I'd been gone. But I had a man with a shotgun, and they'd leave you alone if you had got some help. So anyway, I got this one camel, the guy got off his camel, this Arab, and I showed him what I needed. I needed something I could go like that there, and I showed him where it was, and then I needed a screwdriver. I go like that there. I couldn't talk to him, you know. And so they looked at it, and they listened to me there, and got on their camels, and away they went. And I said, well, now what are we going to do? We can't change that there gas line with a jack. It's all we had of tools. About 15 or 20 minutes later, back comes these Arabs with a pair of pliers and a screwdriver. Huh? Ain't that something? And I fixed that gas line, believe it or not. It had to be reflanged and everything, and the broken part taken out, and I done everything with that screwdriver and a pair of pliers. And I had to do something. I put it back together there and tightened everything up the best I could, and never leaked a drop. And away I went, and I got to Basra before they dropped the bridge. Well, we had so many funny things over there. It wasn't all funny then, but that's the way we operated. Okay, now, when the Russians got the Germans out of Russia, and we got the Battle of the Bulge over with, the train stopped, everything stopped. That's the end, because the war is over. So what are they going to do with all us guys now and all this equipment we got? They had it in the records, in the books, for us to go across to Afghanistan, over the Burma Road. It was just opened up, northern in the Himalaya Mountains in India, into eastern China, and to fight the Japs. And we was going to go over there and by trucks, convoys. And that was all in the schedules. So they had to get these trucks all loaded up with this equipment that Russia didn't need anymore, and going east with it. And the one convoy had already left. And then they dropped the bomb in Japan. And that stopped that, and that stopped our going over the Burma Road. I wanted to see that Burma Road. I wasn't ready to go home. I was ready to fight some more. Well, anyway, that was the end of the war, and I don't know what would have happened in World War II if we hadn't done our job over there in Iran and that supply route to Russia. And that's about all I can tell you. Does anybody have any questions?
I have a question. Those maggots she ate, did you continue that diet, or did you give them up?
It didn't make me sick.
You're 95 years old?
It made me sick to think about it.
Good job.
Yeah. Anybody more got any questions?
Well, I watched you run an engine for years, and I can't imagine you doing 15 miles an hour. It was always wide open every time I rode.
You're right. Yeah. Well, this engine I had to work on over there was an old broken down steam engine. It must have been 100 years old, because they didn't want any of the good power used on work trains. So that's what I was on, and didn't have no air compressor on it, and didn't have no generator for electric, no headlights, no nothing.
Well, they knew that's the only way they could slow you down.
Good job.
I had a conductor work with me. He says, these old engines won't go very fast, Paul. You can run them as fast as they'll go. So I'm coming back from up in the mountains there, and I got that thing that was just a bouncing.
I have a question here for you.
And I couldn't get it slowed down.
What I want to know is what was in Basra that was so important to get there before the bridge went down? Who made your report?
We had to go to this here. The British had this plant there where they manufactured oxygen. Oxygen for the oxygen for the welders. And that was important. And if we missed the bridge, we had to camp overnight somewhere and go the next day. And that wouldn't be good either.
Good job.
So that's about all I can tell you about the weather. Was terrible over there. It was down to over 100 degrees and up to 140 degrees down there in the desert every day. And then you get it up in the mountains, they had snowstorms.
I'd like to thank Paul, 94 years old, and what a memory. I can't even remember where I parked my car, but he's...
Any more questions? Thank you very much for listening to me. And now you all know the rest of the story.
Good job. Okay, thank you guys. That was great.